Some kingdoms are protected by armies. The oldest ones are protected by promises that no one remembers until the wrong person accidentally keeps them. On the night the Caruso Dominion celebrated 600 years under the same immortal crown, no one expected history to awaken because of a human maid carrying a silver serving tray. Riley Evans had accepted the extra shift for one simple reason. Her grandmother's medicine was overdue, and every additional hour inside Blackthorn Castle meant another step toward paying the pharmacy bill waiting on the small kitchen table back home. She wasn't interested in vampire politics. She didn't care about noble families whose names had filled history books for centuries. She certainly had no intention of becoming part of a royal ceremony. To Riley, the towering castle was only another workplace where polished marble floors reflected candlelight. Expensive crystal demanded careful hands, and wealthy guests rarely looked at the people serving them. Yet from the moment she entered the Eastern Service corridor, something felt strangely different. The ancient walls seemed quieter than usual, as though the castle itself was holding its breath. Even the veteran servants whispered instead of speaking. An elderly housekeeper quietly stopped Riley before she entered the Grand Throne Hall and adjusted the collar of her plain black uniform with trembling fingers. "Whatever happens tonight," she murmured, "keep your eyes down." Riley smiled politely, assuming the warning was about royal etiquette. She had no idea it was something far older. Beyond the enormous bronze doors, hundreds of vampire nobles filled the magnificent chamber beneath vaulted ceilings painted with constellations that shimmered like a midnight sky. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm golden light across polished stone, while musicians performed a melody so soft it barely disturbed the silence. At the far end of the hall stood the throne carved from obsidian, simple yet impossible to ignore. Upon it sat King Xavier Caruso. He looked no older than a man in his early 30s, dressed in a perfectly tailored black formal coat with a dark crimson sash crossing one shoulder. His expression revealed almost nothing. He didn't need to speak to command attention. Every conversation faded the instant his eyes lifted across the room. The nobles admired him, some feared him, many wished to control him. Tonight, members of the Royal Council expected him to announce a political union that would strengthen their influence for another century. Instead, Xavier's gaze drifted toward a glass display resting beneath a shaft of moonlight. Inside lay a single black ring. It looked surprisingly ordinary, forged from dark metal with no decoration and no visible value, yet no one stood close to it. No guard touched the case, no servant dusted the pedestal. Even the air around it carried a strange stillness. Riley noticed the display only because she had been instructed to refill crystal glasses near the center aisle. As she passed, she wondered why such a plain ring occupied the most protected place in the kingdom. Before she could think any further, someone stepped deliberately into her path. Lady Seraphina Vale, one of the kingdom's most influential nobles, barely glanced at Riley before turning away, but the movement was enough. Riley instinctively shifted to avoid spilling the tray. One crystal glass slid across the polished silver surface. She caught it before it struck the floor, but the sharp edge nicked the tip of her finger. It was only a tiny cut, hardly more than a scratch. One small drop of blood landed on the polished marble beneath her hand. Riley immediately reached for a cloth, embarrassed that she had stained the immaculate floor during the kingdom's grandest celebration. She never noticed the crimson drop disappearing into an almost invisible engraved line carved centuries earlier into the stone itself. The ancient channel carried the blood silently across the floor like a forgotten river until it reached the pedestal beneath the sealed display. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a faint crack echoed through the silent hall. Every candle flickered at once. The musicians stopped playing. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the glass case as a web of glowing fractures spread across its surface without anyone touching it. Riley slowly lifted her head, confused by the sudden silence surrounding her. Before anyone could move, the glass shattered into countless harmless fragments that dissolved into sparkling dust before reaching the floor. The black ring rose into the air as though answering a voice no one else could hear. It crossed the enormous throne room in complete silence, passing nobles, guards, and members of the Royal Council until it stopped directly in front of Riley Evans. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Riley instinctively stepped backward. The ring moved forward. She raised her uninjured hand without thinking. The ancient band slipped gently onto her finger and locked into place with a soft metallic click. A wave of warm light rippled through the hall. No explosion followed, no chaos erupted, only absolute silence. King Xavier Caruso rose from the throne for the first time that evening. Every noble expected judgment. Instead, the immortal king stared at the forgotten ring resting on the trembling hand of an ordinary human maid, and in a calm voice that carried to every corner of the throne room, he gave the one order no one had imagined they would ever hear. No one touches her. The king's order did not calm the room. It sharpened the silence. Riley stood beneath hundreds of watchful eyes, her hand suspended in front of her as if it no longer belonged to her. The black ring rested against her skin without weight, yet she could feel a steady pulse beneath the metal, slow and deliberate, almost like a second heartbeat. Across the hall, several members of the royal council rose from their seats. No one approached. Xavier Caruso stepped down from the obsidian throne, each measured footstep carrying through the chamber. The nobles moved aside before he reached them. Riley tried to lower her hand, but the ring tightened just enough to stop her. Not painfully, firmly, as though it had been waiting centuries to make this decision and would not allow her to pretend it had not happened. Xavier halted several feet away. His expression remained controlled, but something in his eyes had changed. Recognition, not of Riley perhaps, but of the object now wrapped around her finger. "What is your name?" he asked. Riley swallowed. "Riley Evans, Your Majesty." The reaction was immediate. A whisper moved through the court like cold wind beneath a locked door. Xavier's gaze sharpened. "Evans?" Before she could answer, an older man in ceremonial grey stepped forward from the council platform. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The maid should be removed from the hall and questioned privately." Riley turned toward him. He did not look at her face. He looked only at the ring. "She touched a sealed royal relic," he continued. "That act alone requires investigation." Xavier did not turn. "She did not touch it." The old man's mouth tightened. "Then we have a more serious problem." Riley's thoughts raced. She wanted to explain the broken glass, the scratch on her finger, the drop on the floor. She wanted to say she had done nothing on purpose, yet every instinct warned her that innocence might not matter in a room where everyone already feared what had chosen her. Xavier looked toward the nearest guards. "Clear the chamber." Several nobles protested at once, but one glance from him ended the argument. The musicians lowered their instruments. Servants hurried toward the side doors. Guests moved slowly, unwilling to leave yet unwilling to defy the king. Lady Serafina Vale remained near the center aisle, her elegant face composed, though her eyes were fixed on Riley with open disbelief. As she passed, she murmured, "A servant should know better than to reach for things above her station." Riley met her gaze. "I did not reach for it." Serafina glanced at the ring. "That may be worse." When the great doors finally closed, only Xavier, a handful of guards, the elderly councilman, and 2 royal attendants remained. Riley recognized one of the attendants as Margaret Cole, the housekeeper who had warned her to keep her eyes down. Margaret looked pale. Xavier extended his hand, stopping before he touched Riley. "May I examine it?" The question startled her more than a command would have. Kings did not ask maids for permission. Riley nodded. Xavier brought his hand close to the ring. A thin line of golden light flashed between them, and he withdrew at once. For the first time, the calm mask on his face cracked. Riley saw fear. It vanished almost immediately, but she had seen it. "Take Miss Evans to the East Guest Wing," Xavier said. The silver-haired councilman objected. "The guest wing is reserved for noble blood." Xavier turned toward him. "Tonight, Lucius, the ring has questioned your definition of noble blood." Lucius Vane fell silent. 2 female attendants approached Riley carefully. Neither touched her. They guided her through a side passage lined with dark portraits and tall windows overlooking the sleeping city below. Riley walked without speaking, her mind drifting back to the small apartment she shared with her grandmother, to the unpaid pharmacy bill, to the note Evelyn had placed beside Riley's breakfast that morning. "Please come home before midnight. Do not stay in the East Wing." At the time, Riley had assumed it was another one of her grandmother's strange worries about the castle. Now, as the attendants led her deeper into the very wing Evelyn had warned her to avoid, the memory felt less like concern and more like knowledge. At the end of the corridor, Margaret opened a carved wooden door and dismissed the others. Inside waited a quiet room with a fireplace, a writing desk, and windows facing the forest. Riley stepped in, but Margaret remained near the entrance, twisting her hands together. "You knew something like this could happen," Riley said. Margaret's eyes lifted. "Not this." "Then what did my grandmother know?" The housekeeper's face changed at the mention of Evelyn. Before she could answer, the ring warmed on Riley's finger. A faint symbol appeared across its dark surface, the shape of a crown crossed by a silver thorn. Margaret stared at it and whispered, "That mark has not appeared since Evelyn Everin disappeared from this castle 40 years ago." Margaret's whisper seemed to drain the warmth from the room. Riley stared at the symbol glowing across the ring, then back at the housekeeper. "Everin?" she asked. "My grandmother's name is Evelyn Evans." Margaret closed the door behind her and checked the corridor before answering. "That is the name she used after she left this castle." Riley's pulse quickened. "Left or disappeared?" Margaret hesitated. The fire shifted softly in the hearth, casting long shadows across the walls, both depending on who tells the story. Riley moved toward the writing desk, kneading something solid beneath her hand. The ring had cooled again, but the mark remained visible. "Tell me what happened." Margaret looked toward the door once more. 40 years ago, Evelyn Everin served in this wing, not as a maid. She was brought here under royal protection because she belonged to a family connected to an old agreement between humans and the Caruso throne. Most records were sealed. The staff was forbidden to speak her name. Riley thought of her grandmother's careful silences, the letters she burned without explanation, the way she refused to discuss Riley's mother beyond saying that some histories were safer left buried. Why would she change her name? Because someone wanted the Everin line forgotten. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Margaret stepped away from Riley as Xavier entered without ceremony. Lucius Vane followed several feet behind him, displeasure carved into every line of his face. Xavier's gaze moved first to Riley, then to the glowing symbol. "Leave us," he said. Margaret obeyed, but before she passed Riley, she whispered, "Ask him about the sealed chamber beneath the throne." Lucius heard her. His expression hardened. Xavier did not react until the door closed. Then he faced Riley. "What did Margaret tell you? That my grandmother once lived here as Evelyn Everin?" Lucius answered before Xavier could. "Servants repeat old rumors when they wish to feel important." Riley looked at him. "Then you should have no trouble proving her wrong." The room became still. Xavier's eyes held the faintest trace of approval, but his voice remained calm. "Lucius, wait outside." "Your Majesty, that would be unwise. It was not a request." Lucius bowed stiffly and left. Xavier moved toward the fireplace but kept several feet between himself and Riley. "Your grandmother was known as Evelyn Everin when she came to this castle," he said. Riley felt the truth settle heavily inside her. "Why?" Xavier looked into the fire. "Because the Everins were once guardians of something the Caruso family could not control." Riley lifted her hand. "This ring?" "Partly." His answer came too quickly to be complete. "What else?" Xavier's jaw tightened. "A covenant." Riley waited. When he said nothing more, she stepped closer. "My grandmother warned me not to enter this wing. She knew the ring. She knew this castle. You knew my last name the moment I said it." "I am done accepting half an answer." Xavier turned to her. Up close, he looked less like the distant ruler on the throne, and more like a man who had carried the same secret for too long. "The covenant was created 6 centuries ago," he said. "The first Caruso king promised that vampire rule would never be built on human suffering. The Everin family was chosen to witness that promise and preserve the evidence if the crown broke it." Riley glanced at the ring. "So it did not choose me because I am special. It chose you because it recognized your bloodline." The words should have answered something. Instead, they opened a larger question. Then why did it wait until tonight? Xavier looked toward the window where moonlight stretched across the floor like pale water. "Because tonight the council planned to force a succession oath. The ring may have awakened to stop it." "Stop what?" Before he could answer, a deep vibration traveled through the stone beneath them. The fire dimmed. Somewhere below the castle, a lock older than anyone in the room shifted open. Riley felt the ring grow warm again. A voice entered her mind, faint but unmistakable. Not a command, a memory. A woman speaking through tears. "Do not let the king kneel before the wrong grave." Riley gripped the edge of the desk. Xavier was beside her at once, careful not to touch. "What did you hear?" She repeated the words. His face lost all color. "That sentence belonged to my mother." Riley stared at him. "Your mother died 300 years ago." Xavier's eyes moved toward the floor as another hidden mechanism turned beneath the castle. "Yes," he said quietly. "And the chamber Margaret mentioned was sealed the night she died." The stone beneath Riley's feet trembled once more, then fell still. Xavier crossed the room and placed his hand against the carved panel beside the fireplace. A hidden seam appeared in the wall. The panel moved inward with a low grinding sound, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Riley looked at him. "You knew that was there." "I knew the entrance existed," Xavier said. "I did not know it would open for you." He took a lamp from the mantel and stepped onto the first stair. Riley remained where she was. "You said the chamber was sealed when your mother died." "It was." "Then why are we going down there without guards?" Xavier turned. The golden light from the lamp sharpened the angles of his face. "Because the council does not know it has opened, and I do not yet know whom I can trust." Riley thought of Lucius waiting somewhere beyond the door, of Margaret's warning, and of her grandmother's hidden name. Every answer seemed to reveal a deeper layer of the castle. She followed Xavier into the passage. The wall closed behind them. The staircase spiraled downward for nearly 50 feet, the air growing colder with every step. Ancient symbols covered the stone, some shaped like thorns. Others, like Riley, raised the lamp closer to one of them. The ring answered with a faint silver glow. "Can you read these?" she asked. "Only fragments," Xavier said. "The language predates my house, but the Everins could read it." "Yes." Riley ran her fingers near the carvings without touching them. Then someone made certain that knowledge disappeared. Xavier did not deny it. At the bottom of the stairs stood a circular door made from black stone. There was no handle, only a shallow imprint shaped like a hand. Xavier tried it first. Nothing happened. Riley understood before he spoke. She placed her ringed hand against the imprint. Warmth spread through the stone. Lines of silver light raced outward, forming the same crown and thorn symbol she had seen upstairs. The door opened silently. Beyond it waited a chamber untouched by dust. Shelves curved along the walls, filled with sealed letters, ledgers, and narrow metal boxes. In the center stood a white stone table. Upon it rested a folded black cloak and a small portrait framed in portrait. A woman with dark hair and calm eyes stood beside a younger Xavier. The resemblance between them was unmistakable. "Your mother," Riley said. "Queen Adriana." Xavier's voice softened around the name. Riley lifted the portrait carefully. Beneath it lay a thin sheet of glass covered in writing. The ring flashed. The unfamiliar symbols shifted before Riley's eyes, rearranging themselves into English. She began to read aloud. "To the next witness, if the ring has found you, then the crown has failed to keep the covenant." Xavier went rigid. Riley continued, "Do not trust the official account of my death. I discovered that the records of the first agreement had been altered. The one who controls the history of the crown controls the judgment of the court. The proof is divided. One part remains here. The second was entrusted to Evelyn Everin." Riley stopped. Her grandmother had not merely known about the chamber. She had carried part of its secret for 40 years. Xavier moved to the stone table and opened the nearest metal box. Inside were court records bearing the royal seal, but several pages had been replaced. The dates did not match. The ink was newer. "These documents were forged," he said. Riley looked at him. "By whom?" Before Xavier could answer, the ring tightened. A new symbol appeared on the glass, followed by a final message from Queen Adriana. "The betrayer stands beside the throne and speaks in the language of duty." Footsteps echoed faintly from the staircase behind them. Someone had opened the hidden passage. Xavier extinguished the lamp at once. Darkness settled over the chamber. Riley heard the door above close, then the careful descent of a single person who knew exactly where the stairs led. Xavier moved between Riley and the entrance. "Stay behind me," he whispered. The approaching footsteps stopped outside the black stone door. A familiar voice spoke through the silence. "Your Majesty, I warned you that bringing the girl here would be unwise." Riley recognized Lucius Vane. The ring burned warm against her finger, and across the dark chamber every sealed letter began to glow. Lucius remained outside the black stone door, his voice calm enough to make the warning more unsettling. The chamber was sealed for a reason. Xavier did not move from his place in front of Riley. Around them, the glowing letters cast pale light across the shelves, revealing hundreds of royal seals and forgotten names. "How did you know it had opened?" Xavier asked. Silence followed. Then Lucius answered, "Because I have spent 3 centuries protecting this kingdom from what lies inside." Riley looked at the glass message on the table. "The betrayer stands beside the throne and speaks in the language of duty." Lucius had used that language from the moment the ring awakened. Investigation, order, protection. Every word sounded reasonable until Riley remembered that each one had been used to separate her from the truth. The stone door began to close. Xavier caught it with one hand before it sealed completely. "You gave no order to close this chamber," he said. "No," Lucius replied. "But your father did." Xavier went still. The door stopped moving. Riley could not see Lucius clearly through the narrow opening, only the silver edge of his ceremonial coat. "My father has been dead for more than 200 years, Xavier said. "His command remains part of the royal wards. The chamber was meant to open only for an Everin witness and close before that witness could remove anything." Riley studied the shelves. If Lucius was telling the truth, then the old king had built a trap into the archive. "Why?" she asked. Lucius ignored her. "Your Majesty, step outside. Leave the maid where she stands, and the ward will return her safely once the ring is secured." Riley almost laughed at the careful lie. "You called me a thief upstairs. Now you expect me to trust a room designed to imprison my family," Lucius finally addressed her. "Your family endangered every vampire and human protected by this crown. Then show me the proof. The proof is not yours to judge." The ring flashed. A metal box on the highest shelf unlocked with a soft click. Riley crossed the chamber before either man could stop her and lifted it down. Inside lay a narrow ledger and a silver key wrapped in faded blue cloth. The first page bore Queen Adriana's handwriting. Riley touched it, and the symbols became readable beneath her fingers. "The royal witness does not serve the king," she read. "The witness serves the covenant. No ruler may command, imprison, silence, or harm the chosen bearer without surrendering the protection of the throne." The chamber answered her words. Silver light spread through the walls. The closing door reversed and opened completely. Lucius stood on the other side, his composed expression gone. Released the stone and stepped into the doorway. "You knew the law," he says. Lucius looked past him at Riley. "I knew an incomplete translation. You advised 3 kings under that translation. I preserved 3 reigns," Xavier's voice lowered. "By hiding the one law that could hold them accountable." Lucius straightened. "Accountability is a human ideal. Kingdoms survive through stability." Riley held up the ledger. Queen Adriana disagreed. For the first time, fear entered Lucius's eyes. It vanished quickly, but not before Xavier noticed. Lucius took one step toward the chamber. The ring brightened and an invisible boundary formed across the doorway. He stopped. "The archive rejects you," Riley said. Lucius looked at Xavier instead. "She does not understand what she has awakened. If the covenant is restored, every ancient house will question your authority. Alliances will fracture. The council will turn against you." Xavier glanced at Riley, then at his mother's letter. Perhaps authority that cannot survive the truth should not survive at all. Lucius's face became unreadable. "You sound like her. My mother? Evelyn Everin." Riley's breath caught. Lucius continued before Xavier could silence him. "She stood in this same chamber 40 years ago and made the same demand. She believed the truth would save the kingdom." His gaze settled on the ring. "Then she learned what the covenant required from its witness." Riley tightened her grip on the ledger. "What did it require?" Lucius gave a thin, regretful smile. "Ask your grandmother why she abandoned the ring, changed her name, and spent the rest of her life making certain you never entered this castle." At that moment, the silver key in Riley's hand grew warm. A word appeared across its surface, "Evelyn." Then the ring projected a map of the city into the air. One point glowed inside Riley's apartment. Another began moving toward it through the dark streets. The moving point on the map crossed another block toward Riley's apartment. Xavier understood before she spoke. "Someone is going after Evelyn." Riley closed the ledger and gripped the silver key. "Then we leave now." Lucius stepped into the passage. "Your Majesty?" "The succession ceremony is still in progress. If you abandon the court, every noble house will assume the crown has lost control." Xavier looked at him without expression. "A kingdom that requires me to ignore an innocent woman is already out of control." Narrowed. "You are risking the dominion for one human family." Riley turned toward him. "No, he is risking his reputation to find out why you are afraid of mine." The ring flashed once, bright and sharp. Lucius fell silent. Xavier led Riley back up the spiral staircase while the map hovered above her hand, shrinking and turning as they moved. By the time they reached the east wing, the glowing point was less than half a mile from Evelyn's building. Xavier summoned 2 trusted attendants, but Riley stopped him before he called the royal guard. "Lucius knows every official command you give. If whoever is moving toward my grandmother works for him, a royal convoy will only warn them." Xavier studied her for a moment, then nodded. "There is a private garage beneath the west courtyard." They moved through the castle by narrow service corridors Riley had used earlier that day. The difference was impossible to ignore. Hours ago, she had walked those halls carrying linens with her eyes lowered. Now the king of the Dominion followed her through them while an ancient ring mapped danger above her palm. They reached the underground garage, where a black sedan waited beneath dim amber lights. Xavier took the driver's seat himself. Riley fastened her seatbelt, surprised by the ordinary motion in the middle of everything that had become impossible. The car left the castle through a concealed gate and entered the city. Blackthorn stood on the edge of a modern American downtown, its oldest towers rising beyond streets lined with pharmacies, diners, and apartment buildings. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then steady against the windshield. Riley watched the map. The moving point slowed. "It is on Maple Avenue," she said, 2 streets from her apartment. Xavier accelerated without drawing attention, moving smoothly through the late-night traffic. "Tell me about Evelyn." Riley kept her eyes on the map. "She raised me after my mother died. She worked at a library until her arthritis got worse. She hates hospitals, distrusts banks, and keeps every important document in a blue cookie tin above the refrigerator." Xavier glanced at her. "Did she ever speak of the Everin family?" "Never. She said Evans was the only name we needed." Riley paused. "She also knew exactly which wing of your castle I should avoid. Then she expected the ring might still recognize you." The truth landed hard. Riley had spent her entire life believing her grandmother's caution came from age and worry. Now every warning seemed connected to a history Evelyn had hidden. The map flickered. The moving point reached the apartment building and stopped. Riley's breath caught. Xavier turned onto Maple Avenue and parked across the street. The 3-story brick building looked exactly as it always had. One porch light was out. A bicycle leaned against the railing. Evelyn's kitchen window glowed on the 2nd floor. Nothing appeared wrong, which made the silence feel worse. Xavier reached for the door handle. "Stay close to me." Riley looked at him. "This is my home, and someone arrived before us." They crossed the wet sidewalk and entered the building. The front lock showed no damage. Upstairs, Evelyn's door stood slightly open. Riley pushed it where the small living room was empty. A cup of tea sat on the side table, still warm. The television played quietly with the sound turned low. "Grandma?" Riley called. No answer came. Xavier moved toward the kitchen while Riley checked the bedroom. The bed was neatly made. Evelyn's coat remained on its hook. Her purse rested beside the dresser. She would not have left without either one. Riley hurried back to the kitchen. The blue cookie tin sat open on the counter. Inside were old photographs, a sealed envelope, and a black ribbon bearing the same crown and thorn symbol as the ring. Xavier lifted the envelope but did not open it. Riley saw her own name written across the front in Evelyn's careful handwriting. "For when the ring returns." Riley broke the seal. The letter contained only 1 page. "My dear Riley, if you are reading this, then I failed to keep you beyond the reach of the covenant. Do not believe that the ring chose you because of your blood alone. It chose you because you once made the same decision every true witness must make. You protected someone weaker when no reward was offered." Riley remembered the young maid she had defended that morning. Evelyn continued, 40 years ago, the ring chose me. I refused it after discovering the price hidden in the original covenant. The witness was never meant to die, serve the king, or surrender freedom. Those claims were added later by men who feared judgment. The true duty is simpler and more dangerous. The witness must uncover the truth and speak it before the full court, even if that truth ends the reigning line. Riley looked up at Xavier. He had read the final sentence over her shoulder. His face remained calm, but his eyes did not. A floorboard creaked behind them. Evelyn stepped out of the dark pantry, alive and unharmed, holding a brass candlestick with both hands. Relief crossed Riley so quickly that her knees nearly weakened. "Grandma." Evelyn lowered the candlestick and looked from Riley to Xavier, then to the ring. "I hoped I had more time." The apartment door closed softly in the living room. Another voice answered from the hallway. Lucius Vane entered the kitchen, dry despite the rain, and placed a folded royal order on the table. "The council has declared Riley Evans a threat to the crown. By sunrise, the king must either surrender the witness or surrender the throne." Lucius stood in the small kitchen as if he belonged there, one hand resting beside the folded order. Rain tapped against the window. The clock above the stove read 11:47. Riley looked at the document, then at Xavier. She asked. "They can demand it," Xavier said. "They cannot decide it without the full covenant." Lucius gave a quiet sigh. "You are still pretending this is a legal debate. By sunrise, every noble house will know the witness has returned. Some will challenge the throne. Others will move against the human districts before the court can stop them. Stability requires a choice." Evelyn stepped closer to Riley. "That is what they told me 40 years ago." Lucius looked at her with something colder than anger. "And your refusal nearly divided the Dominion." "No," Evelyn said, "your lies did." The ring warmed on Riley's finger. A thin circle of silver light appeared on the kitchen floor, surrounding Riley, Xavier, and Evelyn, but stopping inches before Lucius's shoes. Lucius noticed. His expression tightened. "The covenant is listening," Evelyn whispered. Riley turned to her. Then tell me everything now. Evelyn's eyes filled with regret. The Everins were never servants of the Caruso family. We were independent witnesses. The first king accepted that no ruler should judge his own promises. The ring remained dormant unless the covenant was threatened. 40 years ago, it chose me after I found proof that council records had been altered. Proof about Queen Adriana? Xavier asked. Evelyn nodded. Your mother discovered the same changes. She believed someone within the council had rewritten the covenant to make the witness appear dangerous and obedient. She asked me to help her restore the original record. Riley looked at Lucius, and then she died. Lucius's voice remained even. The Queen's passing was a tragedy. You ordered us to meet at the old chapel outside the city. Adriana never arrived. The next morning the council announced her death and sealed the Eastern Archive. Xavier's stillness became more severe. You told me my mother died from an ancient illness. That was the official medical conclusion. You wrote the conclusion. Lucius folded his hands. I wrote what the kingdom needed. The words settled over the room. No confession, no denial. Riley felt the ring pulse once. The silver key in her pocket answered with a soft vibration. She removed it and placed it beside Evelyn's letter. Light spread across the metal, projecting a series of dates into the air. 40 years earlier, the night of Queen Adriana's death, 3 council meetings, 1 sealed transport order. A final entry bore Lucius Vane's personal mark. Evelyn stared at it. Adriana's evidence was moved before the chamber was sealed. Xavier read the destination aloud. St. Orison Chapel. Lucius's composure finally slipped. That record proves nothing. Riley looked at him. Then why did you follow us here? Because the council ordered me to secure the witness. No, Evelyn said softly. You came for the key. Lucius glanced at the silver object on the table. That single movement answered more than any speech. Xavier stepped between him and the table. The chapel still contains the missing evidence. Lucius looked toward the rain-darkened window. The chapel has been abandoned for decades, which makes it an excellent place to hide something, Riley said. Lucius returned his attention to Xavier. You cannot protect her from what happens if she speaks before the court. If the covenant rejects your line, the throne's wards will dissolve. The noble houses will test every border. Human neighborhoods will suffer first. Xavier's face remained calm, but Riley could see the weight behind his eyes. Lucius was not simply threatening him. He was offering him the same fear that had kept the truth buried for generations. Xavier looked at Riley. If the evidence condemns my family, you must speak it. Lucius stared at him. Think carefully. Xavier did not look away from Riley. I have spent 300 years ruling from inside someone else's version of the truth. I will not ask you to preserve it. The ring cooled. For the first time since entering the throne hall, Riley could move her hand without resistance. She picked up the key. Then we go to the chapel. Evelyn reached for her coat. I am coming with you. Riley began to object, but Evelyn shook her head. I left this unfinished once. I will not leave it to you alone. The silver circle on the floor brightened, and the door locked before he reached it. He turned slowly. Riley understood what the covenant wanted. Not punishment, testimony. You are coming too, she said. You know where the evidence is hidden. Lucius's eyes darkened. You cannot command me raise the ring. Maybe not, but the truth can. The kitchen lights flickered. From somewhere beneath the city, a distant bell rang 12 times, though midnight had not yet arrived. Evelyn went pale. That is the chapel bell. Xavier looked toward the west, beyond the rain and the rooftops. St. Orison has no bell. Evelyn tightened her coat around her shoulders. It does tonight. The covenant has opened the final archive, and by sunrise it will close forever. The silver circle faded only after Lucius agreed to come with them. 10 minutes later, Xavier drove through the rain with Riley beside him, while Evelyn and Lucius sat in the back seat beneath a silence heavier than the storm. The road beyond Blackthorn narrowed into 2 lanes bordered by dark pine trees. St. Orison Chapel stood nearly 12 miles west of the city, abandoned after a flood damaged the surrounding land decades earlier. Yet the bell continued to sound, each note carrying through the rain even though no tower appeared above the trees. Riley held the silver key in her palm. With every mile, it grew warmer. Why did the ring leave you? She asked Evelyn. Her grandmother looked toward window. It did not leave me. I asked it to sleep. Lucius gave a quiet, humorless laugh. You ran. Evelyn turned to him. I chose to keep my daughter alive. Riley looked back. My mother? Evelyn nodded. Your mother was 5 years old when Adriana died. The council had already begun searching for every remaining Everin. I believed that if the ring stayed silent, they would believe our line had ended. You let me work inside the castle. I tried to stop you without telling you why. I was afraid the truth would draw you toward it. Riley looked down at the dark band around her finger. It found me anyway. Xavier spoke without taking his eyes from the wet road. Truth usually does. The words were simple, but Riley heard the regret beneath them. She studied his profile in the dashboard light. For centuries he had ruled a kingdom built around a story he now suspected was false. He could still turn back. He could surrender her to the council and preserve his throne until another generation inherited the secret. Instead, he was driving toward evidence that might end his reign before sunrise. "When did you first suspect Lucius?" Riley asked. Xavier was silent for several seconds. 112 years ago, I found a discrepancy in the record of my mother's final night. Lucius explained it as a clerical error. You believed him? I chose the explanation that protected the kingdom. And the kingdom survived. Xavier's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Survival is not the same as innocence. Riley watched the road disappear beneath the headlights. "Why did you stop looking?" Xavier answered without defending himself. "Because I was afraid of what the answer would require me to do." The honesty unsettled her more than an excuse would have. He was not asking her to forgive him. He was giving her the truth before the ring forced it from him. The key suddenly flashed. A narrow gravel turn appeared to their left, hidden behind overgrown branches. Xavier turned onto it. The sedan moved carefully through deep puddles until the trees opened around a ruined stone chapel. Ivy covered the walls. Most of the stained glass windows had faded to grey. There was no bell tower, yet another solemn note rolled through the night. The chapel doors stood closed. Xavier parked beneath an old oak, and they crossed the muddy ground together. Lucius stopped several feet from the entrance. Once the archive opens, the record cannot be contained. Riley faced him. That is the point. Evelyn placed her hand over Riley's closed fist. The key does not open a door, it opens a testimony. Whatever you see inside will be preserved exactly as it happened. The ring will know if anyone lies about it. Xavier stepped beside Riley. Then, no one speaks until the record is complete. She looked at him. Even if it condemns your family? Especially then. For a brief moment, the storm seemed distant. Riley had expected command from him, or fear, or the polished certainty of a king. What she saw instead was a man choosing to stand before the truth without knowing what it would take from him. She placed the silver key against the chapel door. The metal dissolved into light and flowed into the lock. The doors opened inward. Warm golden lamps illuminated the aisle, though no one had entered the chapel in 40 years. At the far end stood a stone altar. Upon it rested a wooden box sealed with Queen Adriana's crest. Riley approached slowly. The ring pulsed with every step. Xavier remained at her side, close enough to protect her, careful enough not to lead her. Evelyn followed. Lucius stayed near the doorway until the chapel doors closed behind him on their own. Riley lifted the lid of the box. Inside lay a crystal cylinder filled with silver light and a handwritten statement bearing 3 signatures: Queen Adriana Caruso, Evelyn Everin, and Lucius Vane. Lucius stared at the page. That document's voice was destroyed. Adriana made 2 copies. The crystal cylinder awakened. A life-sized memory formed above the altar. Queen Adriana appeared in the chapel exactly as she had 40 years earlier. Beside her stood a younger Evelyn and Lucius Vane. Adriana looked directly toward the place where Xavier now stood and spoke the first words of her preserved testimony. "My son, if you are hearing this, then Lucius has already lied to you about how I died." Queen Adriana's image stood above the altar in a column of silver light, her expression calm, her voice steady. "My death was not caused by illness. It was arranged to silence the covenant before the full court could hear what I discovered." Xavier did not move. Riley saw the words strike him harder than any accusation spoken by a living person. Lucius took 1 step backward, but the chapel doors remained sealed. The memory continued. For generations, the council altered the original agreement between the Caruso crown and the Everin witnesses. They changed the witness from an independent guardian into a servant of the throne. They added false penalties. They taught each king that obedience preserved peace, while judgment invited ruin. The younger Evelyn in the memory placed several documents on the altar. Beside her, Lucius looked almost exactly as he did now, except his silver hair was darker and his face carried less patience. Adriana turned toward him. "Lord Vane, you signed the corrections. You know the records are false." The remembered Lucius answered in a controlled voice. "The original covenant gives one human family the power to destabilize an immortal kingdom. No responsible council could permit that." "It gives them the power to reveal the truth," Adriana replied. "If that threatens the throne, then the throne has already failed." The real Lucius looked away. Riley watched the memory with the ring burning warm against her skin. The scene shifted. Adriana stood alone with Evelyn after Lucius had left the chapel. She placed the crystal cylinder into the wooden box. "If I do not return to the castle, hide this here." The archive beneath the throne contains the first half of the record. This contains the second. Together they prove who changed the covenant and why. Evelyn in the memory began to cry. What about Xavier? He is young for a king, even if the world already calls him ancient. Lucius has guided him since childhood. My son will believe the man who taught him to rule. Adriana looked toward the unseen future, but one day he must be given the chance to choose truth without me. A council chamber appeared. Lucius stood before 3 senior nobles, including Xavier's father. Documents lay open across the table. Lucius spoke clearly. If the Everins present the original covenant, every human district will demand representation. The old houses will resist. The crown will weaken. We must ensure the witness line disappears from public record. One noble asked. And Queen Adriana? Lucius paused. She will be remembered with honor. Her testimony will not. Riley felt Evelyn's hand tremble beside her. Xavier stared at the memory, his face unreadable except for the pain in his eyes. The final scene formed. Adriana returned to the chapel, pale and exhausted, but standing on her own. There was no attack, no spectacle, only a woman who knew her time was short. She spoke directly into the crystal. "Lucius arranged for a rare compound to be placed in my medicine. It will appear to be a natural failure of the heart. I have no time to expose him openly. Evelyn must protect the record. Xavier must decide what kind of king he will become when the truth reaches him." The image faded. Silence filled the chapel. Rain pressed softly against the stained glass. Xavier looked at Lucius. "You watched me mourn her." Lucius lifted his chin. "You let me believe she had abandoned her duty. She chose ideals over survival." Riley stepped closer to the altar. "No, you chose control over accountability." Lucius turned to her. "You have known this world for one night. Do not mistake simplicity for wisdom." The ring flashed and a signed statement rose from the box. Lines of light appeared beneath each name, confirming the testimony as authentic. Xavier picked up the document. "The royal seal is genuine. My mother's signature is genuine. Yours is genuine." Lucius's composure finally broke. "A signature does not explain necessity. It explains responsibility," Xavier said. Evelyn moved beside Riley. "There is more." She lifted the faded blue cloth from the box, revealing a narrow compartment underneath. Inside lay a second ledger containing payments, secret orders, and council votes spanning more than 200 years. Every false translation led back to Lucius. Every attempt to locate the remaining Everins carried his authorization. Riley turned the pages until she found the entry from earlier that evening. Her own name was written beside an instruction to place her near the ring during the succession ceremony. She looked up. "You arranged my assignment." Lucius said nothing. The answer was already there. "You wanted the ring to awaken," Xavier said. Lucius looked at him with weary certainty. "I needed proof that the Everin line still existed. Once the ring chose her, the council could lawfully contain the witness and secure the covenant forever." Riley understood at last. The broken glass had been encouraged. Seraphina's humiliation had been part of the setup. Lucius had expected fear, confusion, and obedience. He had not expected Xavier to protect her. He had not expected Evelyn's hidden copy to survive. He had not expected the ring to reveal the original law. Xavier folded the signed statement with deliberate care. "You will return to the castle with us, and present this to the full court. You will end your own reign." Xavier looked at Riley, then at his mother's fading image. "If my reign depends on your lie, then it should end." The chapel bell sounded once. The doors opened. Dawn was still hours away, but the final truth had already chosen its witness. The drive back to Blackthorn Castle felt quieter than the journey to the chapel, yet every mile carried more weight. The rain had eased into a light mist, and the first pale hint of morning rested along the eastern horizon. Riley sat in the front passenger seat with Queen Adriana's signed testimony, the original covenant records, and the crystal cylinder carefully secured inside a leather portfolio. The ring no longer pulsed with urgency. Instead, it rested against her finger with a calm warmth, as though it knew the search for the truth was over and the responsibility to reveal it had begun. Xavier kept both hands on the steering wheel. He had spoken very little since leaving the chapel. Finally, he broke the silence. "When we enter the great hall, every noble house will expect me to defend the council." Riley turned toward him. "What will you do instead?" he answered without hesitation. Evelyn watched him from the back seat. "Your mother hoped you would say those words one day." Xavier smiled faintly, though sadness lingered behind it. She waited longer than either of us expected. Lucius remained silent beside Evelyn, looking through the window at the passing forest. The confidence that had surrounded him throughout the night had faded into quiet reflection. He no longer argued. He no longer attempted to justify himself. The evidence resting beside Riley spoke louder than any explanation he could offer. As the castle appeared beyond the trees, the eastern sky brightened into soft shades of blue and gold. Hundreds of lights still illuminated the fortress. The succession ceremony had never truly ended. News of the ring's awakening had spread through every noble house, and the great hall remained filled with council members, royal families, and distinguished guests waiting for the king's decision. When Xavier's car entered the courtyard, the gates opened immediately. Guards bowed respectfully. None of them attempted to approach Riley. They had all heard the king's first command: "No one touches her." Inside the castle, servants hurried through the corridors with anxious expressions. Conversations stopped as Xavier, Riley, Evelyn, and Lucius crossed the marble floor toward the throne room. Lady Seraphina Vale stood waiting outside the great bronze doors. She glanced at the portfolio in Riley's hands before looking at Xavier. "Your Majesty, the council has prepared a formal declaration." Xavier accepted the folded document without opening it. "Thank you." Seraphina hesitated. "They believe the witness should not be allowed to address the court." Xavier calmly handed the declaration back to her. "Then they have forgotten the covenant they claim to protect." Without another word, he pushed open the massive doors. The great hall fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward the entrance. Members of the royal council occupied their elevated seats. Noble families filled every row. Servants remained along the walls exactly where Riley herself had stood only hours earlier. Everything looked the same, yet nothing was the same anymore. Xavier walked directly to the center of the hall instead of taking his throne. Riley remained beside him. Evelyn stood quietly behind them. Lucius stopped several steps away, saying nothing. After a long moment, Xavier faced the assembly. "Tonight began as a ceremony to confirm the future of this kingdom. It has become something far more important." His voice carried effortlessly across the chamber. "For centuries, every ruler of House Caruso believed the covenant between the crown and the Everin witnesses required silence, obedience, and unquestioned loyalty. I now know those records were altered." A wave of whispers spread through the hall. Several council members immediately stood. Xavier raised one hand and the room settled once more. "Before sunrise, every person present will hear the complete truth. No testimony will be hidden. No record will remain sealed. No voice will be denied." He turned toward Riley. "The covenant gives this responsibility not to a king, but to the witness." Riley felt every eye in the room settle upon her. Only hours earlier she had been carrying serving trays through these same aisles. Now the oldest kingdom in the world waited for her to speak. Her heart raced, but her voice remained steady. She stepped forward and placed the leather portfolio upon the ceremonial table at the center of the hall. One by one, she removed Queen Adriana's testimony, the original covenant, the council records, and finally the crystal cylinder. As the cylinder touched the polished stone, it awakened once more, filling the chamber with soft silver light. Gasps echoed through the audience. Some nobles recognized the ancient recording immediately. Others stared in disbelief. Riley looked across the assembled court, then toward Xavier. He gave a single quiet nod. There was no fear in his expression anymore, only trust. Riley understood what the ring had been waiting for all along. It had never searched for a queen. It had searched for someone willing to speak when remaining silent would have been easier. She placed one hand over the original covenant. The ring glowed with gentle silver light. "Before this court hears my testimony," Riley said, "everyone deserves to see the truth exactly as it happened." The crystal brightened, and Queen Adriana's preserved image began to rise once more above the center of the great hall as every member of the kingdom prepared to witness the history that had been hidden for generations. Queen Adriana's image rose above the ceremonial table, clear and steady in the silver light. The entire court watched as her preserved testimony unfolded exactly as it had inside St. Orison Chapel. No one interrupted, no one looked away. When the final scene ended, the hall remained silent. Riley could hear the faint crackle of candle flames and the distant sound of morning rain against the high windows. She opened the original covenant and placed it beside the altered council version. "These documents were changed over generations," she said. "The true covenant never made the witness a servant of the crown. It created an independent voice to protect both humans and vampires from rulers who might place power above justice." Several nobles shifted uneasily. One council member rose. A single family cannot hold authority over an entire kingdom. Riley looked toward him. The Everins were never given authority over the kingdom. They were given the right to reveal the truth. Those are not the same thing. The ring glowed softly, confirming her words. Xavier remained beside the throne rather than upon it, he said. Riley lifted the second ledger. This record shows that Lucius Vane approved every false translation, every sealed order, and every attempt to erase the Everin name. It also shows that he arranged my assignment in this hall tonight so the ring would identify the surviving witness. The room turned toward Lucius. He stood alone at the center aisle, surrounded by the very court he had guided for centuries. His face remained calm, but his voice carried less certainty than before. I acted to prevent disorder. Evelyn stepped forward. You created the disorder you claim to prevent. Lucius looked at Xavier. Your Majesty, even now you can preserve the Dominion. Reject the records. The cold houses will accept your judgment. Xavier's gaze moved across the hall. And the human districts? Lucius did not answer. And the servants whose families were erased from the records? Xavier continued. And my mother, whose final words you buried beneath a false history. Lucius lowered his eyes. The silence became his answer. Xavier turned to Riley. The covenant requires a judgment. Riley felt the weight of the entire court settle upon her, but the ring remained warm and steady. She looked first at Lucius, then at Xavier. Lucius Vane knowingly altered the covenant, concealed Queen Adriana's testimony, and used fear to control the throne. He cannot continue as royal advisor or council member. The ring flashed. The council seal on Lucius's ceremonial coat faded into plain silver. A murmur spread through the hall. Lucius looked down at the empty metal, and for the first time he seemed old. Riley continued, but the failure did not belong to one man alone. The council accepted convenient lies. The noble houses benefited from silence, admitted that he stopped searching when the truth threatened his reign. Xavier did not defend himself. He stepped forward. That is true. Several nobles gasped. Riley met his eyes. The covenant does not demand the end of House Caruso simply because its king was afraid. It demands a choice after the truth is known. The ring brightened until silver light surrounded Xavier's hands. Xavier Caruso, will you keep the throne by hiding any part of this record? Riley asked. No. Will you restore the original covenant? Yes. Will you allow human representatives, independent witnesses, and public review of all future royal decrees? Xavier looked across the court. Yes. The obsidian throne trembled. Thin lines of gold appeared across its dark surface, not as cracks but as new markings forming the ancient crown and thorn symbol. The ring cooled on Riley's finger. The judgment had been accepted. Lucius raised his head. And what becomes of me? Xavier answered before Riley could. You will face a public tribunal under the restored covenant. You will have counsel, the right to present evidence, and the same fair process you denied others. Lucius stared at him. Perhaps instead he found law. Guards approached, but they did not seize him. They simply escorted him to a secure chamber to await the tribunal. Serafina Vale stepped forward next. Her voice was quieter than before. I participated in the plan to humiliate Miss Evans near the display, though I did not know Lucius intended to awaken the ring. Riley looked at her. Then you will testify honestly when called. Serafina bowed her head. I will. Evelyn moved to Riley's side and took her unringed hand. You did what I could not finish. Riley squeezed her grandmother's fingers. You kept the truth alive long enough for me to find it. Xavier faced the full assembly. Before this day ends, every altered record will be released. The Everin family will be restored to history. Human districts will receive representation in the royal court. No witness will ever again be forced into silence. One by one, the servants along the walls lifted their eyes. Then the nobles did the same. The sun rose beyond the eastern windows, filling the great hall with gold. Riley looked down as the black ring loosened for the first time and slipped gently from her finger into her palm. Its work was almost complete, but one final promise still remained. The great hall slowly emptied as scribes began copying the restored covenant, and messengers carried sealed orders toward every district of Blackthorn. By mid-morning, the castle no longer felt like the same place Riley had entered as a maid. Doors that had remained closed for generations stood open. Servants were invited into rooms where decisions had once been made without them. Human representatives arrived from the city, and certain and steadier when Xavier welcomed them by name instead of rank. Riley remained near the ceremonial table, holding the Vesper ring in her palm. Without its grip around her finger, it seemed smaller, almost ordinary. Yet every person who passed looked at it with quiet respect. Evelyn stood beside her, wrapped in a borrowed grey coat. The long night had left shadows beneath her eyes, but her posture was lighter than Riley had ever seen. "You should sit down," Riley said. Evelyn smiled. "I spent 40 years hiding from this day. I can stand through the morning." Riley looked across the hall. Xavier spoke with 3 city delegates beneath the golden windows. He no longer stood above them, he stood among them. "What is the final promise?" Riley asked. Evelyn's expression softened. "The ring does not return to sleep until the witness chooses freely what comes next. I thought it chose my duty. It chose your right to speak. It cannot choose your life." Riley closed her fingers around the ring. All night, others had discussed what she represented. An Everin, a witness, a danger, a bridge between worlds. No one had asked whether she wanted to remain inside the castle after the truth was revealed. Xavier approached when the delegates departed. For the first time since the ceremony began, he wore no crown and no royal coat, only a dark shirt with the sleeves folded at his wrists. He stopped several feet from Riley. "Your grandmother has been offered rooms in the West residence until her apartment is secured." Evelyn raised one eyebrow. "Offered," Xavier said. "I am learning." Riley almost smiled. Xavier looked at the ring in her hand. "The council chamber has been suspended until new representatives are elected. Lucius will receive a public hearing in 3 days. Lady Seraphina has submitted her full statement. The archives will remain open." He paused. "There is one decision I cannot make." Riley understood. "Mine, yes." The hall had grown quiet around them. But Xavier lowered his voice. "You owe this kingdom nothing more. You may return home. You may keep your position, leave it, or accept a place as royal witness under the restored covenant. No title will be placed upon you without your consent." Riley studied him. The vampire king who had once seemed carved from darkness now looked tired, uncertain, and completely honest. "What do you want me to choose?" she asked. Xavier's gaze held hers. "That is the one answer a king has no right to request." The ring warmed between her fingers. Riley thought of the apartment above Maple Avenue, the medicine bills, the blue cookie tin, the castle corridors where she had once lowered her eyes. She thought of Queen Adriana, who had left her son a truth instead of a command. She thought of Evelyn, who had protected a child by walking away. Freedom, Riley realized, was not the absence of duty. It was the power to choose which duty deserved her life. "I will become royal witness," she said. Evelyn inhaled softly. Xavier did not smile immediately. "Are you certain?" "On 3 conditions. Name them." "The position will never pass by blood alone. Every future witness must choose it freely. Human workers in the castle will receive fair wages and independent protection. And my grandmother's medical care will not be treated as royal charity." Xavier considered each word. "The first 2 will be written into law today. The third will be covered through the new public health fund for every resident of Blackthorn, including Evelyn." Riley nodded. "Then I accept." The Vesper ring lifted from her palm, silver light circled her hand, but instead of locking around her finger, the ring settled upon the ceremonial table. The crown and thorn symbol appeared above it, followed by a final line from the original covenant. "The witness shall stand beside power, never beneath it." Everyone nearby fell silent. Xavier lowered his head, not as a king demanding loyalty, but as a man honoring a promise. Riley looked at the servants along the wall. Slowly, one by one, they stepped forward into the light. By sunset, her maid's uniform had been replaced with simple dark clothing, bearing no noble crest. Her old room remained hers until she chose another. Nothing was taken from her. Nothing was forced upon her. That evening, Riley found Xavier alone in the eastern corridor beneath the last yellow lamp. He looked through the window toward the city. "My mother believed I could choose differently," he said. Riley stood beside him. "She was right, only because you gave me the chance." Riley shook her head. "I showed you the door, you walked through it." For a moment, neither spoke. Beyond the glass, Blackthorn's light spread across the darkness. Human and vampire homes glowing beneath the same rising moon. Xavier turned toward her. Riley looked at the city, then at the quiet ring resting safely within the open archive. "Tomorrow we begin proving the truth was worth hearing." 3 days later, the great hall opened its doors before sunrise. This time there was no succession ceremony, no velvet barrier, and no servant ordered to remain invisible along the walls. Human representatives sat beside vampire nobles beneath the same high windows. Scribes recorded every word. The original covenant rested in a glass case at the center of the chamber, while the Vesper ring lay beside it, silent and unclaimed. Lucius Vane entered under guard, dressed without council silver. He was given counsel, the right to speak, and the right to challenge every document presented against him. Riley watched from the witness table with Evelyn seated behind her and Xavier standing at the lower level of the throne platform. He had refused to preside over the hearing alone. 3 independent judges had been selected, including 1 human magistrate, 1 vampire historian, and 1 elder from a neutral house. The evidence was read aloud. Queen Adriana's testimony filled the chamber once more. The altered records were compared line by line. Lady Seraphina admitted her role in placing Riley near the display and described how Lucius had promised that the incident would expose a hidden threat to the crown. Lucius did not deny the documents. Instead, he repeated the defense he had offered all night. He had acted for stability, he had preserved order, he had protected the kingdom from uncertainty. When the judges asked whether Queen Adriana had consented to the medicine he arranged, Lucius lowered his eyes. No, he said. That single word ended 2 centuries of excuses. The tribunal removed him permanently from public office and placed him under lifelong confinement in a restored monastery outside Blackthorn, where every historical record he had altered would be corrected under supervision. His estates were transferred into a public fund for the districts harmed by council policies. Xavier accepted the ruling without interference. Lucius looked at him before leaving. You believe mercy will make you strong. No, I believe law must be stronger than anger. By noon, the new covenant was signed. Human representatives received permanent seats in the Royal Assembly. Castle workers gained written protections, fair wages and the right to report abuse without noble approval. The archives opened to the public. Queen Adriana's true history was carved into the Eastern Hall, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a record of courage. Evelyn's name was restored beside hers. Riley refused a jeweled title. She chose a simple office above the public archive, where anyone could request an audience with the royal witness. Her first visitors were not nobles. They were 2 kitchen workers asking about unvampire seeking permission to protect a human foster child under royal law. Riley listened to both. Weeks passed. The city changed slowly, then visibly. Human families entered government buildings without separate lines. Vampire houses began opening schools to both communities. St. Orison Chapel was repaired and preserved as an independent court of testimony. Evelyn moved into a small home near the castle gardens, close enough for Riley to visit every evening and far enough to keep her own key. Her medical treatment came through the public health program, exactly as Riley had demanded. One autumn night, nearly 3 months after the ring awakened, Riley found Xavier beneath the yellow lamp in the eastern corridor. The city glowed beyond the window. The ring has not chosen anyone else, he said. It does not need to, Riley replied. Not while the covenant is being honored. Xavier looked toward her. And when it is not, then someone should be brave enough to tell you. A quiet smile touched his face. You usually are. Their bond had grown without promises forced by fate, without a crown placed between them. He asked for her judgment. She challenged his certainty. Some evenings they disagreed until the lamps burned low. Other nights they stood in silence and watched Blackthorn become something neither had inherited, but both had chosen to build. Xavier reached into his coat and placed a small object on the windowsill. It was not the Vesper ring. It was Evelyn's old silver key, restored and engraved with the crown and thorn. For the public archive, he said, it should belong to the person who opened it. Riley picked it up. I did not open it alone. No, Xavier said, but you were the first person in this castle who believed truth could enter without destroying everything. Beyond the glass, the moon rose over human streets and vampire towers alike. Riley looked toward the open archive below, where the Vesper ring rested beneath clear glass, no longer a weapon of power or a symbol of fear. It was a reminder. Kings could forget, councils could lie, history could be buried. Yet one ordinary hand, guided by courage and kindness, could still bring the darkness into the light. Xavier lowered his head to her, not in defeat, but in respect. Riley stood beside him, never beneath him, and for the first time in centuries, Blackthorn entered the night without a secret.